Welcome to Marvel Vision, a podcast about Marvel, the MCU, and right now, Ant-Man and The Wasp Quantumania. I'm Alex.
I'm Justin.
And we are going to be talking all about Ant-Man 3, the third movie in the Ant-Man trilogy, continuing cohesively the story from the first two Ant-Man into the third Ant-Man movie.
Just the kind of language we always knew we'd be saying as kids. The third movie in the Ant-Man trilogy.
Well, we're definitely going to get into that, and we're also going to get into spoilers. If you haven't seen the movie in theaters, definitely turn away now because this is a full spoilers podcast. We're going to be getting into it, talking about it. But before we do, I want to talk about how we saw the movie. I saw it at a regular movie theater in Regular Town, USA, aka...
Ew!
I know, New York. You saw it at Disney World, right?
That's right. I was at Disney World with my fam, and one night, the last night we were there, everyone got back, and they were tired. It was Friday night, and I was like, there's a screening at 11 p.m. I'm going to get the bus and go there. Went there, watched the movie. It was fantastic. But when you watch a Marvel movie so close to the home base, I feel like, it's like taking a drink from a fire hose. It's just more
you could
Disney
feel
than
Walt's
Disney.
head sort of like floating next to you the entire time.
Yeah, and everyone who goes to Disney gets a couple hours with Walt's head. So I actually brought Walt to the movie with me,
Nice.
Futurama style, and boy, did Walt, he had some notes about the movie.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'd imagine he would. One is like, not enough floating heads, there's only one.
Yeah. And he was like, what is this strange place? Why am I alive? The questions
Kill me, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, cool. So that out of the way, why don't we talk about the movie? Obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about this. Did great at the box office. Not a huge surprise.
Crushing.
But what were your overall impressions? I know already that I was a little more negative about it, let's say. But I definitely want to get into positives. We're going to talk about positives first, but I'm curious to get your bead on the movie.
Well, let me say it's just really exciting that Marvel finally has their Star Wars prequel movie. Finally has just the all Jar Jars.
Oops, all Jar Jars.
Exactly. I mean, obviously, this movie there's a lot riding on it, feels like. It's a kickoff to Phase 5. It's a lot of Kang. We're going to get Kang all day. Kang Gang is coming for us. And this is the opening of that. And I just thought Kang is amazing. The movie is a little messy, and it wasn't as fun as I wanted it to be across the board, I think. There's it's a weird movie. I'm surprised how weird the movie is for it being a big swing. And not weird. The other Ant-Man movies were smaller, pun intended, and a little more focused. This is huge, weird, and without focus, I thought.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I think my big thing is because of the lack of the focus is I almost wanted things to be a little weirder. There was a little bit of a wash in terms of the plot. Like, everybody's bringing up the Star Wars comparisons, which I get because you have an emperor and you have a rebellion and all of these things. But it mostly, despite the fact that they're talking about there's this whole universe underneath our own, it seems to take place on one planet, alien planet type thing, even if it's a teeny tiny little planet. And the rebellion, I don't feel like you get a good sense of it other than, boy, they're a rebellion, all right. You know how rebellions work. We can skip past all of that stuff about how Kang's bad anyway. Let's keep going. So there's a lot of like barreling through it in terms of the plot. I also just thought, and I know I said we were going to start with positive, but this is just sort of like overall, it's a messy looking movie. Like, I think the direction is messy and the look is messy. I don't know if they filmed all of it or most of it on the volume, but it shows there's just like this brown wash over everything, where I like the Ant-Man movies. I like the first Ant-Man, really liked Ant-Man and the Wasp, and there's a real kindness going through those movies that just wasn't present here. It just seemed gross and occasionally kind of mean and not fun to look at. That was my big thing. I was like, I don't like looking at this movie. So that was definitely the negative for me, but I do want and that's the overall negative. But let's talk about some of the positives, right? Things that you liked in there. I'll throw out there
positives.
No, go ahead, Justin. I want to hear from you.
Uh, oh, positives? Yeah, I mean, Kang across the board is. I feel like the movie sort of comes alive when he's there. He
Hmm.
has a real sense of himself in the movie, and is one of he has a direction. I think at all times in a movie where everyone feels a little bit like, where are we? What's happening? Who am I? I'm lost. It feels like he is the one that is a bit of an anchor. I thought the Michelle Pfeiffer stuff was I was surprised that she was the center of the movie. It left Paul Rudd off to the side, I think, a lot weirdly. But I like Michelle Pfeiffer's parts here. Like I thought the stuff with her and Kang, and I wanted to see more of her in the microverse, in the quantum realm. I guess is what we should be calling it, microverse in the comics. Uh, so she was cool, and Paul Rudd's very charming, even though he felt like he was acting in a plastic bag the entire time.
Yeah, I think all of the actors did an adequate job, and I know that sounds dismissive, but really, they didn't bring the movie down in any way. Paul Rudd, fine. Michael Douglas loves ants. Clearly, like he had this incredible emotional arc of
Yeah,
liking ants, and by the end, he still likes ants. So that was pretty cool. But less joking aside, I agree with you.
uh,
Jonathan Majors just regal, gives this great presence. I don't think the script gave him necessarily a lot to do, and frankly, it didn't make a lot of sense to have Kang in this position, which we can get to in a bit, but he did a very good job with what he had.
yeah,
My absolute favorite scene in the movie was the one of just Michelle Pfeiffer and Jonathan Majors hanging out and talking, like actually acting with each other with nothing
yeah.
exploding in the background, no plot things or limp jokes or anything like that, just like two actors acting about stuff. And that popped for me in a way that nothing really in the rest of the movie did. I'll also throw out one that I think is very controversial, and I'm sure since you didn't mention it, maybe you disagree with me. I liked MODOK. I liked MODOK because, and I
No,
wish, hold on, here we go. I'm just going to throw it out there.
hard no.
I wish it was grosser and weirder. Like there's a moment towards the end of the movie, and like I said, we're gonna get to full spoilers. We haven't even talked about the plot of the movie. I'm just gonna assume people watched it and know what's going on here. Actually, just very quick on the plot. So before we get too far,
Cool.
just in case somebody's listening to this and was like, I'm not gonna see that in theaters. So Cassie sends a signal down to the quantum realm. They all get sucked down there. Turns out that Darren, formerly Yellow Jacket, uh, captured them with that signal, brought them to Kang because Kang needs them to quote unquote steal a part of a multiversal engine that Michelle Pfeiffer broke back in the day when she was working with Kang. Kang was exiled by a bunch of other Kangs, took over the quantum realm when he wants to come to the regular realm and take it over, and ultimately they stop him using some bats. So that's the overall plot of the movie. But I mean, it
Wow.
is. There's a couple of other things going on, but not much. But MODOK is weird, and he looked weird, and he looks weird. He's a goofy, weird villain in the comics, and I think they channeled that effectively in terms of like, this is upsetting to look at. Let's go.
Well, but here's the thing: why did we do this? Because
Yeah.
it looks weird. The I just thought it was gonna look better. Because when I
Hmm.
was like, MODOK is a weird idea, so it must look dope, or he has a big reason for being there. And I thought it looked like he was just holding his face up behind a magnifying glass, which I was
Hmm.
like, that's not 3D animation. That's not like cool CGI.
I mean, listen, there's been a lot of talk in general about the effects in Marvel, and there's a lot of stuff that came out around the time that She-Hulk came on the air,
Yeah,
talking about how overworked, underpaid, last second changes that are coming in with these effects artists. So when I say this, not blaming the effects artists at all, the effects look like garbage for the most part, like absolute garbage. So I do feel like if you can get past that, having a big faced MODOK floating in his chair with his tiny little baby arms and tiny little baby legs, shooting rays out of his head, uh, I thought that was at least fun. Like there was something that was fun and comic booky about that. And I've seen a lot of fans call this out, and I think they're correct. I think this is why a lot of comic book fans are liking the movie, and we should definitely get and talk about the fan critic divide towards the end of the
mm,
podcast. But I think fans are responding because it is very comic booky. It's very Kang looks like Kang. He's floating on his little blue platforms and stepping on them.
Yeah.
MODOK, despite the garbage effects, looks like MODOK and kind of acts like MODOK, but he's dinky and dumb, just like he mostly is in the comics. Not really a threat, just kind of stupid. And all of the stuff that's going on here, all of the wash of a plot, it's the sort of thing that if I read it in a comic book, I might be like, yeah, that was a fun Ant-Man story, But there's a
Well,
difference.
here's the thing, though, because
yeah, go ahead.
a lot of people have said this movie is so comic booky, and I think that's an insult. The way a lot of people are using that term, I feel like they're being like, yeah, it's comic booky. It's a bunch of stuff that I don't need to understand. I just get to sit here and listen to it. And I find that to be, out of some people's mouths, some critics and other podcast people, a little insulting, because if something is comic book, I want it to be like super imaginative, big mythology, really caring about the characters and driving forward a lot of story. That to me is what comic books are. And to say that this is comic booky because it's like in a weird place with characters that look funny, I'm like, that's not the compliment you think it is.
No, I agree with you, but that's absolutely not how I mean it. I mean, we read a ludicrous amount of comic
100%.
books, and
I'm not saying you, I'm saying others.
Yeah, totally. But I was trying to sort of parse through my feelings about that, and I think part of the thing is, like what I was saying, it's the sort of thing that if this was an 4-issue Ant-Man series, and we read this, we'd be like, that was fun. Maybe it would have good art. Maybe it would have some poppy writing. You get like a Jeff Parker on it or something like that.
Good. It does feel Jeff Parker. That's a great
right.
call.
Like it would be a good time to read that comic. Years later, somebody would bring it up and would be like, "Oh, right, Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania." I remember reading that miniseries back in the day, and that's fine. Like I'm fine with that. But what Marvel has always done very well is think about what works in the comics, now push that to the side and figure out what works in the movies. And I think here in this movie, the ratio was off. You ended up with more on the side of, oh, this will be fun because this is like a comic book, which just doesn't work on the movie screen in the same way. That's what I'm trying to get at.
Well, and I think the main reason for that from my side is Ant-Man isn't the center of this movie, and he should be. The Scott Lang, Paul Rudd, that is the secret sauce of the first two movies. Michael Pena, not even a ghost of Michael Pena here. Which
Can
is,
I mention something about that really quick about the Michael Pena thing? I liked the beginning as well when they were on Earth. There were real backgrounds and real locations. I thought there were some fun bits in there. They weren't the strongest bits of the world, but at least I was like, okay, we're hanging out with these characters we like and we're setting up the situation. This is fun. But later on, thinking about it, the fact that they felt the need to invent some sort of device, aka Ant-Man writing a book about his time with the Avengers, to recap everything when there is literally a fan favorite character whose only job is to recap everything that's happened already in the Ant-Man series, and they're like, nah, don't need him. He's not available, I guess. Take it away. Was a little crazy.
Yeah. It was, and I think that just goes to show like there's a bunch of sort of like odd choices that I think sort of cast us off in the wrong direction with the movie. Like when a superhero movie is built around the idea like, will the hero be the hero? Like this was where Cassie's like, are you even a hero anymore? And I was like, yes, that's why there's a movie that we're watching. Of course he's going to be the hero at the end of the day. That plot to me is such a backwards way of trying to make a story. And especially when so much of Ant-Man is like out of his depth in a difficult situation, which is the point of this movie. I was like, make him trying but doing a bad job funny. Then it could be funny. It could still have the epic stuff. The idea of him fighting Kang, someone he has no business fighting, and somehow winning, that to me is so exciting. And in this, he had to be Captain America. And we just don't want Ant-Man as Captain America. We have Captain America.
Yeah. I 100% agree with that. And I think, like you're kind of getting at here, again, when I was thinking about it afterwards and sort of running down all the characters in my mind, they all have the bones of an arc there, but it doesn't pay off in any logical way. I mean, to run them down a little bit when I was trying to think through them, I think starting with Ant-Man, the idea that he saved the world, maybe got scared of it. We saw that a little bit before with Tony Stark in Iron Man 3, where he has having the PTSD, or he finally has his daughter back and he doesn't want to like get involved in crime, so he doesn't lose her again. I get all of that. Like that is a good
Yeah.
emotional arc to deal in. But like you're saying, when Cassie yells at him, it's like, you're not even a hero anymore. What opportunity has he had? He hasn't
Yeah.
had, there's no crime that he sees. They talk about the blip refugees, but we never see them. We never see
Yeah.
him walk by and be like, what a shame, and, you know, refusing the call. So she's yelling at him for no reason. And then ultimately, like you're saying, he saves the day, but kind of in an Ant-Man way, but not in an Ant-Man way. The Wasp, no arc, like no arc. I mean, we could probably
No
touch it.
character.
No character. We could talk out a little bit. There's a part of me that was a little happy about that because Angeline Lilly was like a major anti-vaxxer for the past couple of years. She apologized for it, but put out a lot of dangerous misinformation at the same time. But her arc was like, well, I'm going to the quantum realm. I found out my parents had sex, and now I'm saving Scott.
Yeah. There's no, also the chemistry between them is like
Non-existent.
negative,
Yeah.
non-existent. It's crazy. And especially at the end of the movie when they're trapped in the quantum realm for what, 30 seconds before they get saved. I was like, leave them there. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Yes.
Like when they get pulled out, I'm like, what was the point of anything? He
Yeah.
sacrificed himself by not going through the portal for 30 seconds of extra quantum realm time. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But like when they're like kissing, I was like, bleh. It was like seeing two twins kiss each other. I was like, it's just not there. And I guess they have to keep going with it. But now that maybe we've completed the trilogy here, we don't need to push them together when it feels like the characters themselves aren't interested in that.
Yeah. I also thought it was kind of funny with that at the beginning of the movie, Hope is now running Hope Tech or Hope Van Dyne Tech or whatever they're calling it. And they list all of these things. She's like, she's working on the environment and she's working on this thing and this thing. And I expected it to be like, and not vaccines. She's not working on that. Not interested in that.
Yeah.
But getting over to Kang for a second, I'm just like literally looking down the cast list here on Wikipedia. But Kang, like we talked about, great. But I'm going to throw out my problem with this. My problem with this is I love the idea of Kang. Kang is very cool, but there are too many sci-fi concepts going on in this movie. They shrink down. Shrinking is the core of this trilogy to a quantum universe, which instantly, in my mind, is less interesting than what they were showing off when they were going through the quantum realm before, because it's just generic Planet 46, and that's pretty much it. And they get there, and then Kang is talking about the multiverse, but other than one sequence, it doesn't play it anyway. And Kang's like, I control all of time. I will throw your daughter in a time box and make you watch her die over and over again. I was like, not that I want to see that, but let me see any of that. Like, he's just in this movie, and this is again Jonathan Majors unimpeachable. He is guy who shoots blue rays out of his hands, and that's pretty much it.
Well, and I think we do have a problem with Kang is cool, and they've deployed him in interesting ways, but we don't know. He keeps talking about traveling through time, but why didn't he travel through time here? He's stuck in the quantum realm. I don't think he can travel through time. I think he needed that engine to travel through time, but he didn't have it because he needed Ant-Man to steal Pym particles. I was like, he has them on him. Why does he need to steal them? That didn't make none of that made sense. And
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, I like the idea that the whole thing is Ant-Man does heists, but I was like, the heist is in his wrist. The answer, the thing is right here. If he just gave that to him, he could have made the engine back to the size it needed to be or whatever.
Well, beyond the fact that in the first movie, the whole plot of the first movie was that Darren, who is now MODOK, was trying to recreate Pym particles. And now he is in a situation where Kang, with 31st century technology or whatever he's using there, and he can't make Pym particles. Like, he shrunk them down.
They're very hard.
He also, Darren shrunk them down to the quantum realm. Like, he talks about that. So they have the possibility of doing it. That central heist thing, it makes no sense. It's nonsense. Like, it is, like you're saying, it is a heist to have a heist because that is part of the movie, but it is 100% not a heist. The other thing that I want to mention about Kang, though, is, again, love Jonathan Majors. I'm going to keep saying that until the cows come home. But the fact that now in the MCU, we've been like, okay, Kang is an Avengers level threat. He's going to take down the Avengers. He's going to take down the whole universe. Also, once we watched him encourage a second tier Loki to kill him and then he died, and the second time he was taken down by an army of ants, He doesn't seem like a very big threat to me at this point.
Well, and let me say, agree completely. Also, they did the same trick twice with in Loki. He was like, "Hey, I'm the good king. You don't want the others coming." And in this movie, he's like, "Hey, let me win. Otherwise, these other guys are coming." And then in the post credit, we see the other guys, and then they're wearing like Halloween adventure style costumes. I was like, "Yo, why did you kill the cool looking kings and you got goof kings coming on the side here?"
This was another thing. I mean, just to get back to the comic booky nature of it all, this is another thing where, like, costume wise, at the very least, they lead way too much into the comics. You've got, and I know we're jumping ahead to the end credits here, but you get three Kangs, one maybe Scarlet Centurion. He has like these glowy things. Like he's like, I fell
Yeah,
into a laser tag arena and this is what I came out with. But
yeah,
then you've got Ramatut, who is the Kang from back in Egypt, which they shouldn't touch at all, to be perfectly frank.
no,
And then also you've
get out
got
of that.
Mortis, who is the Kang from the far future. In the comics, at least, usually that's the Kang is like, no, I don't want to be a conqueror anymore. I just want to study things. But that's the three of them together, and they look like shit.
Yeah. They look so goofy. And then they cut to like 50 other Kangs screaming at each other. I was like, what is this?
I don't
Why
know.
are they so mad
I
or
don't
wound
know.
up? And that's where we leave a villain that we're meant to take very seriously. The last moment we have in that scene, I was like, you've just undercut so much buildup and so much of Jonathan Major's legit work, especially in the Loki series, of making this villain seem nuanced, smart, and scary. And then he's just screaming in a Kang
Well, and
arena.
then they follow it up. Mind you, I like the second scene because I like Loki. It
Agreed.
is a good show. But the second scene, to your point, is Owen Wilson being like, this guy doesn't look scary. Why is everybody so scared of them? And Loki being like, he's terrifying. Look at his terrifying goofy hair and mustache. So
Yeah.
yeah, they have not done a good job of setting up Kang. However, I will mention at this point in Thanos's development, he had sat on a goofy chair and been basically Ronan turned off his FaceTime on him. So Thanos
Yeah.
also hadn't done a lot by this point in the MCU. So they have the possibility of turning it around. We'll see.
And that's fair. But I would argue that with Thanos, they were slowly showing more of him. And
Hmm.
Kang is already overexposed. So they have
Yeah.
sort of the opposite trajectory here. And I'm not saying that they can't pull it out. I'm just surprised by some of the ways that it happened. But I agree. The second sequence, I actually liked that Kang. That seems interesting. And we're finally using some time here, some time travel.
Yeah.
So hopefully, Loki, I do think it's weird that they're using major tentpole Marvel movie to mildly set up a second season of a Disney Plus show that, yes, does have big implications, but I found that to be a strange, big reveal at the end
I
of the movie.
agree. I think part of it, though, is everybody loves Tom Hiddleston as Loki. The Loki show is
Yeah.
well regarded. They are teasing it there. You got Owen Wilson in it, so that's interesting. So if you don't know what's going on, you might be like, "Oh, I got to check out that Loki show. That's cool." And you've also got, just to mention, Easter egg wise, Victor Timely. That is a character that Kang travels back in time in the comic books in order to basically pull a Booster Gold and use his future technology to seem more impressive than he is. Also, Timely is named after Timely Comics, the original name of Marvel Comics. So, fun little Easter eggs in that scene. That was good. Looking forward to Loki season two.
Yeah.
There was something else that I was going to say about Kang. I don't remember what
Okay.
it is. Yeah. Why don't we move on to the other characters, though? We've got Kathryn Newton comes in here as Cassie, taking over for the actress who previously played Cassie, who is, I think, the same age. So weird that they didn't let her do this.
Yeah.
But there's been a lot of talk online I've seen back and forth about Kathryn Newton just being like, all she does in this movie is run and yell dad, and that's pretty much it. How did you feel about her?
Yeah, I mean, especially I like Cassie in the comics. I think she's a good, like, headstrong, like very Ant-Man style. Like she is her father's daughter in the comics, and in this, she's a little bit of just a caricature of that. Like I want her to be a little grittier, and maybe she will be in a Young Avengers style movie coming down the pipeline. But yeah, I wanted a little bit more from her, and especially the central relationship here is Scott needs to save his daughter, but we don't get time with them hanging out, or we don't get to see them be fun. They're just always running and missing and chasing, and she's like, "Drink the ooze" and all that. That cutaway was crazy. So, like, I guess all to say, like, I think she was all right, but I want a story that really we get to see more of her.
So to throw out about her arc and not to be a backseat writer or anything like that, but again, I think this comes back to like if you could feel different iterations of the script while you were watching this. And the basic idea that Cassie, when she was 6 years old, was terrified of Yellow Jacket coming into her bedroom, called him the Bee Man, that's traumatized her whole life. And then finally she gets some sort of catharsis against this guy. That's a good emotional arc. However, the way that they paid it off by her saying, don't be a dick, didn't make any sense to me. Like, if there was
Yeah.
her growing big and being like, oh, I'm not scared of you anymore, not that you necessarily need to spell it out, that works for me. Like, her getting over that fear, but her ultimately being like, hey, Darren, don't be a dick, that didn't seem to be an impression that she got from him. That's not what her trauma had to do with. It was more about pushing him so that he could stand up to Kang at the end, and then we could get that final scene with MODOK.
Yeah, I agree. None of that really tracked for me. Like, and I think that goes to show with a lot of the characters here, they were a little too cool for school the entire time. Like, she never seemed scared. She just seemed like they kept falling into different, very dangerous situations, and she seemed like, oh, we got this. This is fine. Don't be a dick. It's like, that's not what you say to your greatest fear. The idea
Right.
that her greatest fear now looks like a total, like, dumb floating head, that's a really interesting thing, to have the boogeyman be lame when you finally confront it. And they just didn't, like, to your point, they just didn't pay that off. And there was no emotional arc for her in relation to that. And I think the same with Scott. I think same with Wasp. Never felt truly under threat. Felt like the only one who was scared the whole time was Michelle Pfeiffer. And she actually knew it was,
Right.
she was the one who did know what was going on and was a celebrity in the microverse.
So maybe you could explain this to me, because I had trouble tracking her plot arc based on what we were told and what we were shown, and maybe I missed something or misinterpreted something. But the way that I understand it when she's talking to Bill Murray, which is another thing that we should talk about at some point, is
Yeah.
he's like, the implication from that scene is that she was working with Kang for a while. Everybody knew that, and then something happened and she abandoned everybody. And everybody was like, how could you leave us with Michelle Pfeiffer? And that's when everything went wrong in the microverse. But then we see the scene of her working with Kang where there's literally nobody around except for the two of them. She gets that psychic impression of him as a conqueror, is like, nope, that's it, I'm out of here. And immediately, as soon as she finds other people, presumably starts or joins a resistance against Kang and is fighting against Kang the entire time until she's taken back home in Ant-Man and the Wasp. So those two ideas don't gel for me. And again, maybe there's something that I'm missing there.
Well, yeah, I think what we're missing a lot is just sort of an understanding of what the quantum realm is. In my brain, like, hearing how it works, it feels like the quantum realm should be this endless, massive galaxy where how would anyone ever know each other? It felt like what we were seeing with Janet by herself camping and then eventually encountering Kang. That felt like what it is. The fact that it's like a huge hang where everyone knows everyone, I was like, how does this work? The microverse is literally the tiniest version. There should be millions and millions of planets. So that is inherently weird. I wish they had explained that a little bit.
And I think, to get back to the Star Wars of all, this is again why I think people are like responding to Star Wars a little bit. We've talked about this before on various podcasts. The Cantina scene wrecked sci-fi from the first Star Wars. And this entire movie felt like they're like, we love the Cantina scene. You love the Cantina scene. What if this whole movie was the Cantina scene? Wouldn't that be fun? And I'll tell you what, it's not fun. It's too much. It worked in the Cantina. It doesn't necessarily work here. We get multiple iterations of that where, with these, like we're talking about, washes of characters. Bill Murray, I mentioned him before. I don't know what your theater's reaction is, but when Bill Murray showed up as the contact that Janet was waiting for, there was big laughter from the audience, that like recognition laughter of like, oh, it's Bill Murray. He's here to do something funny. And then literally no reaction to any other thing that he said the entire time.
Well, and I think rightly so. Like, that character was like, oh, just a random guy, basically, who had sex with Janet is all we really get, and isn't human. So you're like, sort of like, what does that mean? And then he eats a monster and then gets eaten by a different monster. And it's like, okay. It just felt like, again, like what did I understand why you wanted that cameo, but what did you do with it here in this movie?
Hmm.
And to
So
get back to your
yeah,
question about Janet, like I feel like she had that time with Kang, and then was the leader of the rebellion as Kang was becoming emperor. I think she was fighting against him, and that's why everyone knows her. But they just didn't show us a frame of that. And I think we should have seen. We only heard people talk retroactively about it, and I think it would have been a more interesting thing if to see, a 2 minute montage of her leading a rebellion. That would have been dope. And it would have given us so much more context to the current rebellion that we spend a ton of time hanging out
yeah.
with characters that we don't ever get to know. Besides, that guy wants holes.
Let me just throw it out there, and then I want to move on to the rebellion people. But if Janet was working with Kang and helped to build this whole society while they were waiting around, and this whole army and this armada, and then ultimately realized through the psychic vision when they were about to go home, oh no, I helped this conqueror do this thing. That explains a lot more to me. And it explains a lot more to me because she caused this rebellion. She caused the downturn of the microverse. That's something that when she gets back home, she would be embarrassed to tell people. I don't know why she
Right.
would be embarrassed to be like, I met this really dangerous guy down there and I tried to stop him for decades. I can't talk about it. That
Yeah.
is weird to me.
That's definitely true. I agree with that. And I would have liked it if they did build a society there, and it would make more sense why she was be revered yet feared, like you're saying, which I think is the vibe when people see her. They're like, oh no, you can't be here. And instead, we don't know, like you're saying, we don't know why.
Yeah. So here's, I don't want to put the blame on one person by any means, but just for some context, something that I was thinking about. This is written by a guy named Jeff Loveness. He is another ex Rick and Morty writer, along with Michael Waldron, who wrote Multiverse of Madness,
Yep.
and also Kat Koira, I believe, who I think that was the showrunner of She-Hulk. So there's a lot of Rick and Morty people coming on here. Here's my basic thought about this movie, and I've seen other people point this out, so I'm not going to take credit for it. But more than a Star Wars movie, this feels like this is almost a Rick and Morty movie. I don't know if you watch Rick and Morty,
Yeah.
but like, there's a lot of jokes in here. You were mentioning the holes guy, straight up a Rick and Morty thing. All of the MODOK things,
Yeah.
very Rick and Morty things. Even like this rebellion and conqueror and everything. While I was watching it, I was thinking this is the sort of thing that could potentially work in a Rick and Morty scenario, down to all the thing about drink the ooze and all the gross stuff. But the problem is, I feel like they didn't make a choice which direction they were going to go with. The Ant-Man series so far has been kind. It has been nice. Rick and
Yeah.
Morty gets some real emotion in it by the ends of the best episodes, but it's not kind, it's not nice, it's mean. It's characters shouting at each other and pushing each other down and saying snarky
Yeah.
things. And this, to me, walked right in the middle of that. Like nothing was weird or gross enough. Nothing was mean enough. None of the jokes were sharp. They were all soft because they were walking this line between, oh, we're Marvel, we're not Rick and Morty, but also let's put some of these weirder ideas in here, like the guy who wants holes and everything. And because of that, you end
Yeah.
up with this like 50% mishmash of tones that don't work and jokes that don't work because of that.
I agree with you. And I feel like the tone of this movie, like you're saying, is like a soft Rick and Morty. And that is not the Marvel style. The Marvel style is like Tony Stark, rat-a-tat, like sarcastic. Let's get our jokes in. Let's get our quips in. That, ding each other, but everyone does care for each other at the end of the day. And I think that was the winning formula of phase 1 and 2 and 3. And we've lost that. I think they're trying out other directions to go in. It makes sense. You have to change up and move forward. But this feels like such a step back. And especially this movie, like this movie claims that these characters love each other and want to take care of each other, but we don't actually see it. They say it, but we don't actually see that in the way they treat each other and the way they perform everyone's a hero in the movie. They're all heroic, but we don't really feel it from anyone in relation to each other, I think.
Yeah. Just real quick, because I think we should move on to other things, but to talk down the rest of the characters or some of the other characters. William Jackson Harper, great, even though he was given some limp material to work with. I feel like he got at least some of the titters out of me in terms of laughter in his lines, but the way that it
Nice.
was cut together, like the way that it was shot was bad. Like there was I don't know if it was the editing or the footage they had or anything, but like the rhythm of the jokes were all off. And Michael Douglas, we mentioned before, what a weird arc. What a weird arc of
Yeah.
like, they know he likes ants. This is what everybody is based on. They're all ant-based heroes being mean about him, being like, I can't believe you like ants, you jerk. And then he shows these amazing things these ants are doing. And then the payoff is like, I like ants. There
Yeah.
was that scene where it's just Michelle Pfeiffer and Michael Douglas in the ship, and Michelle Pfeiffer is doing like the I don't actually have anything on set, and I'm just sort of twisting my hands around and doing like Doctor Strange meets Tony Stark movements, and Michael Douglas is there with his hands out in that
Yeah.
goop thing. There got to be a moment downtime on set where they're like, "We used to be real actors, right?"
Remember, like talking to other people when they're just like gesturing weirdly, pointed in different directions from each other. I mean, to talk about that for a second, like that's a big problem with this movie, and I think a lot of not even just Marvel movies, but just like the way characters aren't actually acting to each other. They're like lost. Like
Yeah.
you can see Paul Rudd feels like he is legit like doing the lines and like I know what I'm supposed to say, but like I don't know what's happening. Like there's too much going on, and they need to just sit down with each other and hang out and talk to each other.
Hmm.
Even if you want to just do that, you need to do it a little bit in the beginning so we can get to know them and get to know who they are now. Like I know we've seen 2 movies and more of Scott Lang, but we need to see him here. Like he does the book stuff, and everyone's like, "You're lame," and then they're like, "Michael Douglas." He's lame because he likes ants. And it's like, Michelle Pfeiffer, why is she so wound up? Like the movie's condescending to its talent and its characters in a way that if you let them breathe a little bit, then it doesn't have to be that way. Then we can get on board with their games. But it all is just such a wash because of the production stuff we're talking about and the way the writing is put together.
Well, and listen, I think this gets to the bigger thing overall is you can have something for anybody who doesn't know who's listening what the volume is. I mentioned that earlier. This is a new type of soundstage that was started for The Mandalorian that's basically a virtual background that is much more realistic looking so people can act against it. It works if you have somebody who knows how to shoot it properly. If it isn't somebody who knows how to shoot it properly,
Yeah.
like what I think happened here, it looks bad. And the actors aren't acting off anything and they aren't looking at anything. The entire movie I spent being like, I wish you shot this in Arizona. Just like go to a desert.
Yeah.
Nobody's going to be like, we have decades of movie making where they go to Arizona or they go to a desert somewhere. They shot freaking Star Wars in the same Tunisian desert a million times, and we're never like, that's Tunisia, you idiots. I know that's not
Yeah.
Tatooine. Like, we're able to go with you, and it gives people something to work off of. And I understand shooting on the same soundstage in Atlanta or London all the time is probably cheaper and saves some money, but it looks bad if you don't have the right person shooting it. Peyton Reed, great comedy director, completely lost shooting a movie like this.
Well, and I think it especially works for something like Mandalorian, especially the earlier seasons where it was like one guy occasionally talking to one other person. And it's like, great, stunning vista, character walking through, limited cast, limited lines. You don't even see his lips move. So like the writing and the story is always going to make it easier to shoot something that is like pulled back with a wide look, interesting. And when it's so interactive and there's like hundreds of characters on screen at different times, it is like it makes it so much harder for the people doing the performance and production to know what's happening, let alone us watching it.
Yeah. Well, why don't we move on to what you talked about earlier in terms of this transition from phase 4 to phase 5? You've been very derogatory, I think, towards phase 4 and the direction of it. Now that we have this direction here, how are you feeling about that?
Well, I mean, I like that we have a direction at least. I'm curious though what our next steps are, because it does feel like the direction we're at now could be the beginning of phase 6 also, the way
Mm-hmm.
phase 6 is laid out. So we have a lot of time and we're fully in Kang world. So I don't know what will happen next, and that's fine to not know what's going to happen, but it feels like the momentum built up very quickly, suddenly in this movie. So I think we need to get that where the momentum is going to
Yeah,
go for the
my
next 2
my
years.
worry right now, thinking about this as compared to phase 1 through 3, is, and this is kind of a crazy thing to say, but multiverse, if that's what we're dealing with, is one thing. And what I mean by that is like it is executed in the same way. We've already seen that. And I understand there was a utility in explaining it in Loki, and that if people didn't watch a Disney Plus series, explaining it again here in Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. But it feels like every time they introduce multiverse to like Sam Wilson, he's going to be like, what's going on? They're like, all right, there's this thing called variance and there's the universal time. And they're
Yeah,
going to have to go through it every single time in different ways.
incursions. Hmm.
And it executes almost exactly the same way versus the Infinity Stones. As they were introducing them, they're all different things. The Time Stone works differently than the Power Stone, works differently than the Reality Stone. Some of them were garbage, some of them were not, but you at least have some options there in terms of what actually happens in the movie. It's that is my worry right now. They can totally get around it. They're very creative screenwriters, but that is my concern now when we're getting into the multiverse. Is it's a lot of Kang over and over, the same guy, Jonathan Majors, dude dressed in his like Egyptian uniform, and now he's wearing a big mustache, and now he's like in a, I don't know, he's wearing a Gumby costume or whatever. Like he's going to come out in a bunch of different ways, and unless we see this execute differently and interesting things happen, it's going to feel samey. It's going to feel repetitive. So that's my worry right
Well, and
now.
back, I agree. And back in Infinity Stone, the first three phases, they slowly parceled out information, and we comic book people knew like, I think I know what this is. It allowed us to speculate and have some fun that way. And they've flipped it with this, where it's like it's the multiverse. So now we're going to re-explain the multiverse a bunch of times, and we know what it is, and we even know Kang pretty well now. So how are they going to parcel out information? How are they going to reignite our curiosity so we can have these debates and get us to these next movies when they've already shown all their cards?
Yeah. The other thing that we should probably talk about here is, obviously we're pretty negative about the quality of this movie. There's been a big divide here, as there usually is with any big budget movie, between fans and critics. Everybody points out the Rotten Tomatoes score. The audience score as of this taping is in the 80s, I think, and the critic score is like 47% or something like that. So there's definitely a divide going on there, and this expands into a big like, is Marvel over debate.
Yeah.
Start with that second thing first. I think it is very naive to say that Marvel is over. I think,
No,
yeah,
it's a huge success, this movie.
yeah, absolutely. And it's going to keep going. I do think, though, and this really depends obviously on your personal reaction to these things and your personal feeling about things, because I've seen people who've really loved this movie and had a good time watching this movie, and I think that's great. But I do think the perception of the quality ratio of Marvel has flipped. And it is
Yeah.
flipped through phase 4, where everybody were willing to give it a chance because there's such a good feeling about this franchise. But given there were mixed reactions to a lot of things in phase 4, now that you have a movie that 50% of people think is bad and 50% of people think is good, now it starts to feel like there's cracks in the armor. Do you agree with that?
I agree. And just this is very anecdotal, but like when the movie ended at Disney Springs in Florida, when I watched it at 1:30 in the morning, people were like, okay. Like there was the enthusiasm was not there. Everyone was sitting there waiting for the post-credit scenes, but there wasn't the energy of the earlier Marvel movies where it was like, yeah, all right, here we go. And people talking and being like, okay, so what that means is like someone explaining what the post-credit scene is and all that. That energy just wasn't there. And I think people will still go see these movies. Like we're definitely in the machine. But I would throw out there, and this is a little business speculation, if if Flashpoint is as good as the trailer is making it, even though we are hesitant to believe that, if it's good, and if what James Gunn says, like, hey, we're going to write great stories first, and then we're going to make great movies based on those scripts, that could really upset the dynamic here.
Mm-hmm.
If Marvel starts to lose ground and DC starts to gain ground, then things are going to get crazy in a way that will make all the movies better.
I 100% agree with that. And I think, this gets to, there's been a lot of talk about with Bob Iger. There's two Bobs, so I always mix them up. But Bob
Say
Iger
a
coming
Bob,
back,
one of the
yeah,
Bobs.
Bob, one of the Bobs coming back and being put in charge of Disney, kind of looking at everything and being like, "Whoa, let's hold back there. Let's kind of reevaluate what we're doing with Disney Plus, with our theatrical releases." Marvel has talked about they're slowing things down a bit. We may only get two Disney Plus series this year. They moved the Marvels back to November, again, as of this taping, and are sort of looking very carefully at the movies and how the plot works. It still could be bad, like anything could be bad. Less of something doesn't necessarily mean it's better, but at least it means that you're spending more time and thinking about it. And I think this gets to what you're saying about DC, that frankly, this is the same thing that's been in comics for decades. Is DC and Marvel flip back and forth in terms of their quality, and
Yeah.
they challenge each other to do better. When DC is ascendant, Marvel's like, oh shoot, we got to catch up. And when Marvel is ascendant, DC does exactly the same thing. It also, when they're down, it allows them their time to be like, well, we're out of the spotlight. Let's just try things. Let's figure things out. We can't play the safe anymore.
Yeah.
I don't know if that goes into Hollywood, a machine that traditionally plays as safe as humanly possible leads into that. But I would hope it does. I mean, Marvel started at a place where it was, this is a risky bet. Will this even work? At the very least, I was going back and taking a look at this, and I feel like at the very least through the end of phase two with Ant-Man, they were in places where they were like, let's just try things. Let's see what works. I don't know if this is
Yeah.
going to work. We got to put it all on the table here. And then post that, when they started heading towards Endgame, they started to play it a little bit safer and started to just be like, okay, we're setting up this thing to set up this thing. We're going to slot that in there. And that very much feels like the place they're in with phase four, where they tried a lot of things, but not as strongly as perhaps they would have back in the day. So this is a long way of saying, to your point, if DC does end up being ascended, and we really won't know that for another 5 years, honestly, then that potentially pushes Marvel into a place where they are second tier and they can hopefully try a little bit harder.
Well, and I think it is about taking more time, really writing into your scripts more before you're already thinking about the larger story and the larger plot machinations. Like really thinking about your characters, getting through that stuff before you make the bigger swings, which is what they did in those early phases. Because that's all they had. They had their characters, they had great talent in there, and they let that drive the story. And they were they were like brasher with like, we'll figure this out, but they did. And now it's like we got it figured out, but they're not doing the smaller
Mm-hmm.
work of making the individual movies, individual characters as exciting and emotional and interesting as possible.
Yeah, I think to get back to Ant-Man, you're 100% right about that, because like we've been talking about, the emotional core of Ant-Man isn't here. Like the emotional core of the actors aren't here. There's spectacle on display. There is plot on display. So if those are the things you respond to, and I've certainly seen a lot of fans respond to that in terms of, yes, we're finally getting Kang, we're finally getting the plot. That's what a lot of fans want out of comic books too. They just want the plot to move things forward. That's not personally what I respond to. I would rather a movie that has almost zero plot, or at least like a little bit of plot, like an idea there, but really it's about the characters and the emotion. And my big takeaway from this movie is I came out feeling nothing. Like I didn't feel anything at any point,
Yeah.
and that is a huge negative to me.
Well, and I sort of made the comparison fliply, but like the Star Wars prequels, episodes one, two, and three, had the same problem. They were all plot, all like, we're going to get to this stuff you already know. Isn't that exciting? It was like, it is exciting, but you have to really like all these characters before we can get there. And I think that's a true suffering of this movie. So hopefully going forward, they can flip it back.
Before we wrap up here, why don't we go to our vision board where we talk about what is coming next in Marvel? The tease at the end here was not Ant-Man will return, but Kang will return. We got the big tease at the end of, I was about to say the episode, but end of the film, where once again, we nonsensically get Ant-Man's narration. I say nonsensically because at the beginning he was reading a book. At the end, he's just thinking, and we're hearing his thoughts, I believe. Um,
Yeah.
and then
Maybe a
we
new book.
maybe a new book. But he is wondering about, hey, Kang said something bad is coming. Uh-oh, did I cause the end of the world? No big deal. I'm going to eat some bad ice cream cake. And that's where they kind of end up there. So what do you think is coming out of this? I mean, I think we know a couple of places, but where are we going to see Kang next? Are we going to see Ant-Man again? What's going to happen?
Well, we're going to see Kang and Loki probably, and maybe not in many other places for a while. I would hope. We need to get a little Kang break. Let Kang Gang chill a little bit. My big takeaway from this movie, though, is who exiled that Kang there? The other Kangs? Or was it a perhaps universe exploring family of four that travels
Hmm.
around the cosmos? Are we going to get something that leads back to this Kang being stuck there at some point?
Interesting. My implication was that it was those three at the end who exiled him, but we could certainly see Kang in a Fantastic Four movie. That makes a lot of sense. To big picture about the plot as we're going forward, I think what we're going to get is we have all these Kangs, like you just mentioned. We're going to see at least a couple of them probably in Loki or different iterations of the same Kang. We might see him in Fantastic Four as well. But I think the place that we're heading towards is Kang Dynasty. We're going to get a very loose adaptation of the Kang Dynasty storyline from Avengers, which is great, by the way, where Kang rewrites the timeline so that he's won. He has conquered the Earth, he has conquered everything. The Avengers are in prisons. It's a post apocalyptic world. And that's something that we haven't actually seen yet.
And I love that. That
Yeah.
idea of a hard reset in a world where our heroes are in separate places. It'll feel a lot like the post blip scenes in Avengers Infinity War, which is exciting.
Yeah.
Great place to
So
be.
I think we're going to get that. And then the other thing we're going to get that was teased back in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, and again mentioned here, they use the word incursion. For anybody who doesn't know, this is something from Jonathan Hickman's run of Fantastic Four and then in Secret Wars and played in a bunch of different other places. But basically, I think what we're going to get is through probably not even Kang's finagling, but something in terms of how they try to reverse the timeline and stop Kang and Kang Dynasty. They're going to cause an incursion that's going to destroy the entire universe. Like Kang talked about in this movie, we're getting towards the end of everything. It's going to be the end of every universe. And ultimately, what happens in Jonathan Hickman's Secret Wars is they are able to hold on to little pockets of different dimensions and create a new planet called Battle World, which is taken from the original Secret Wars in 1985. Ultimately, it's revealed, I believe, in that crossover that Doctor Doom is running it. But the rumor is, and this is a potential spoiler, but I think this makes a lot of sense, is the ruler of Battleworld in Avengers Secret Wars is going to be another variant of Kang called the Beyonder. And given that they have given him multiple names at this point, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. You still have Kang as the villain in Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars, but we get to see Jonathan Majors in a mullet, and that's a big win for everybody.
I mean, in watching this movie and how much they've exposed Kang so far, the idea of having Kang be the villain of the Secret Wars movies would that feels like too much. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they'll do it like you're saying, but it feels like we're gonna ride with this guy as our main villain for what 3 more years. That feels like so much time with this guy.
It does feel like a lot of time, and really all they need is for Hank Pym to pull out his army of ants again, and they'll win against Kang every single time.
Yeah. 100%. Another thing, though, coming out of this, especially with Cassie, Stature
Mm-hmm.
being here, like we're barreling toward Young Avengers. And it's also exciting to me, if you haven't read the Young Avengers run of comics, the leader is a guy named Iron Lad that we find out later is a young Kang.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that we're going to get a young version of Kang who is a hero in the MCU is really cool if they go with that direct adaptation.
And if they do that, do you think they should have Jonathan Majors with like a high squeaky voice that keeps breaking?
Yeah. Hey, I'm going to go to Egypt.
That's my next stop, and then I'm gonna have a beard, and then I'm gonna fall into a laser tag arena.
Are you guys sick of me yet? I'm everywhere. I'm in Creed too.
Oh my God,
Dude,
just real quick before we wrap up here, that final fight with Kang and Ant-Man, even if like it was filmed way too closely, the amount of power that Jonathan Majors was putting in the punches, I was like, Jesus, we're watching a Creed movie right now. He's gonna kill Ant-Man, and not in a way that I'm scared, but like he's gonna kill Paul Rudd. Like not Ant-Man, Paul Rudd.
Yeah,
is
that's
dead.
what 100%. Yeah, exactly. That's why I was like, Ant-Man beats Jonathan Majors? I don't think so. That's a real science fiction right there.
Yeah. All right. There we go. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumania. Please let us know. Even if you like the movie, we love hearing from people that like movies, even if we were very negative for most of this episode. But if you'd like to support, what were you going to say, Justin? Or were you just sighing?
Oh, I also like movies. But let me throw out there were a couple good jokes. The joke with MODOK being like, at least I got to die an Avenger, was, I thought, very good and like very much in tone with Marvel comedy. And I wanted more stuff like that.
Yes. Yeah, that whole scene with MODOK dying, I thought was great. Him vomiting a little bit. Again, very Rick and Morty, the whole thing, but I enjoyed it. That
Yeah.
was one of the only parts that I laughed. So there you go. MODOK, best part of the movie. We both agree.
That's called Positive Corner. We do it right at the end.
If you'd like to support this podcast and the other podcasts we do, patreon.com/comic book club. Also, we do a live show every Tuesday night at 7 p.m. to Crowdcast on YouTube. Come hang out. We would love to chat with you about the MCU. Apple, iTunes, those are the same thing. Spotify, Stitcher, or the app of your choice to subscribe and listen to the show at Marvel Vision Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Comicbookclublive.com for this podcast and many more. Until next time, stay marvelous.
Stay marvelous. Pete, you have a take? No time. Bye-bye.